Hi, it's Jeff Morano. I want to welcome you to True Texas History, and today I'm going to be talking about remembering Goliad and why that's important. Um, in Texas history, the other day I mentioned Goliad, so that's why I wanted to go ahead and follow up on it. Many of us were taught that, hey, there was a massacre at Goliad. Yet we don't fully understand what really happened there and what went down. And that's why I wanted to go ahead and go over Goliad today. What happened on Palm Sunday, the 27th of March, 1836, 342 men were executed by the Mexican commander and his forces there. Although the commander didn't want to execute them initially, Santa Anna was insistent that they must be executed. And of course, one of the things is, the men that were prisoners there, some of them were volunteers from the United States, some of them were Texans, 100%. And many of them had received assurances from the Mexican government officials, from the army. They were just going to be there at Goliad until they were deported. Maybe one of the things we're supposed to learn from Goliad is don't trust military officials and their promises. I don't know, but one of the things, you're just going to be deported. Nothing bad's going to happen. But things were miserable there at Goliad, prior to the execution that day. These 342 men had to sleep in the stone church. It was not comfortable. That's a lot of recent cold northern had come through, so you're dealing with cold stone. No fireplace, because if you've ever been to Goliad, you'll know that on the coastal plains, because things always, the humidity and stuff is always much more biting on the coast, and you had all those things as part of that. Also, the Mexican government intentionally reduced the rations that each man was given prior to that time. Pretty bad conditions leading up to the day of the execution. Now, on that morning, they were taken out into three different groups. The men were taken to three different locations, and the officers simultaneously lined the men up in double rows facing away from their captors. Once they were in position, the men were separated into separate lots, and each lot was commanded to come forward and kneel. At that point, the Mexican troops would come up 3 to 4 yards away and open fire. They fired on them with .75 caliber weapons, which those musket balls, when they hit, they tended to shatter the bones of the men that were hit. So even if you were wounded, it made it very difficult to get away from the situation. Now, at one location, there did happen to be a couple of priests that tried to exhort their comrades. When their time was called up, they led the men in prayer. No Texian refused the prayer. The prayer was included, "Thy martyrs we are, but we lay not to their charge. Let not our deaths be visited upon them. We who bleed beneath their knives beg it of thee." And at this point, the pastors were interrupted by the voice of the Mexican commander, who in a rage yelled out in Spanish, "Fire! Fire! Finish with them!" And they unleashed. If that's not bad enough, because it's pretty brutal. Then what happened, some of the Texans did fake like they were dead and scrambled away. But the Mexican troops, they had lancers, and these were men mounted on horses with long lances. This was a shock troops of the day, and the lancers hunted them down and ran them through if they caught them. And those that were still there on the ground, the Mexican troops went over the troops with bayonets, stabby, 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 and if that was enough, they also had clubs and butcher knives. Now keep in mind that axes and butcher knives were also used at the Alamo to clean up and make sure nobody made it out alive. This was some of the tactics that they used. The sick and wounded also didn't receive any kind of special treatment either. They were taken out beside the church for the most part and bayoneted. They weren't even given the decency of being shot. Just stick it right in them. Now, Fannin was shot there. Now, although some people said, hey, this is a church. How can you let this go on at a church? Well, Santa Anna, when he moved into a position of power, he nationalized all the churches, so there was no special significance given to the church. It was not considered sacred at that point. It was just another piece of property. And so the men at Goliad, they had it rough. And it wasn't just the soldiers, because as Santa Anna's men came up, they were also brutal and killed many of the colonists in the area as well. So you had civilians as well as soldiers being killed. And this is before they had, the Geneva Convention and established rules of warfare. So there were no rules of warfare there. They just did what they wanted to do. And this incident caused a lot of outrage in Texas, in Mexico, and in the United States. They considered, that what happened was over the top. This is why the men at San Jacinto were instructed, to remember the Alamo, remember Goliad, remember Tampico, because, Tampico, everybody was butchered as well that went down there. You also had that at the Alamo. And so I think you can understand some of the rage that the soldiers felt. And, at the Battle of San Jacinto, some of the Mexican soldiers, were saying, "Me no Goliad, me no Alamo." There was something to it. And, keep in mind that these men knew what happened at Goliad. They knew what happened at the Alamo. They also knew what happened in Zacatecas. Zacatecas is a region of Mexico, silver mining region, and Santa Anna, that was essential for him to take. If he was going to conduct campaigns, he needed a source of wealth, and the silver mines was one of them. And they rose up against him, and essentially at Zacatecas, he gave his soldiers permission to rape, murder, pillage, do whatever they wanted to without accountability. And so you have this army that had already done that in Zacatecas, had already shot a bunch of colonists and soldiers on their way up to Texas. They had good reason to be afraid. There was some significant threats posed by Santa Anna. And so when this happened, there was good reason for outrage. Now, let's go ahead and put a few odds and ends about Goliad into context. First of all, James Fannin, who was the commander there at Goliad, he was also at the Battle of Gonzales. So, he was, there with the people with come and take it. So he was a veteran. Now, also at Gonzales, one of the previous commanders, a fellow by the name of Philip Dimmitt, he issued the Goliad Declaration of Independence, where Texas declared its independence in 1835, way ahead of when the official one occurred on March 2nd. This upset some of the authorities of Texas, and that's why Philip Dimmitt was replaced, because had that been recognized, well, for one thing, then our birthplace of independence would not be Washington on the Brazos, but it would be Goliad. Is this part of what we're to remember? I don't know, but it also happened there at Goliad. There were a lot of things at Goliad that happened, and when you know the details, it helps you understand some of the context. I've visited the site, and I don't know if in looking at the site you get a taste for the true horror and bloodthirstiness that went down there when the Texians were executed. because I don't recall him talking about how the men were bayoneted and went in there with butcher knives to make sure that they were good and dead. Kill them and kill them again, so to speak. That's kind of brutal. But that's the type of stuff that the early Texians that set up the Republic had to deal with, and they want us to remember and not to forget those things. So, if there's a particular topic or area of Texas history that you want me to cover, feel free to leave your comments below, because I'm going to make it through things just one at a time, not necessarily a chronological order, but just some of the interesting things that have happened that people have forgotten about that we need to remember, because it makes us better people, helps us make better decisions, helps us to understand our roots and where we fit into the whole flow of history. So until next time, this is Jeff Murrah, wishing you the best. Vaya con Dios. Remember Goliad, remember the Alamo, and remember Tampico. Till next time, goodbye.